Have you ever wondered why some women seem naturally valued and treated with care, while others, equally intelligent, beautiful, and talented, end up being treated as disposable? The answer has nothing to do with your appearance, your career, or your social media following. It has everything to do with subtle behavioral patterns you're probably not even aware of. Patterns that send silent messages to the male brain. Messages that say you're too easy, too available, that you don't value yourself. Today, I'm going to walk you through 5 specific signs that are quietly undermining your perceived value. And the 5th one is the most dangerous of all, and there's a good chance you're doing it right now. How the male brain actually evaluates value. Before we get into the signs, you need to understand something fundamental about how the male brain works, something most women never learn. Men process value through a deeply primitive evaluation system shaped by millions of years of evolution. Before any rational thought kicks in, a man's amygdala is already scanning hundreds of microsignals you emit, sorting them into 2 categories: high-value signals or low-value signals. And here's the critical part. These signals have absolutely nothing to do with your accomplishments or status. They have everything to do with your energy, your presence, and how you occupy the space around you. Once you understand this, the 5 signs I'm about to share will make complete sense. Sign 1: excessive emotional availability. This is especially common among women who were raised to be warm, nurturing, and always available for others, and it's one of the fastest ways to tank your perceived value early in a connection. Here's a concrete example. You meet an interesting man, you've been exchanging messages, and things feel promising. Then one day, he mentions he had a rough day at work. His boss was unfair, he's feeling overwhelmed. You, being the empathetic person you are, immediately shift into problem-solving mode. You send a long message offering advice, validating his feelings, telling him he's amazing and his boss just doesn't see it. You might even suggest he consider changing jobs if it's affecting his mental health. This feels kind and loving, but neurologically, you just triggered something damaging. When you demonstrate excessive emotional investment before any real foundation exists, you activate his brain's reward system in the wrong way. The male brain is wired to place high value on things that require effort, on challenges, on things that aren't easily obtained. When you deliver deep emotional validation without him having done anything to earn it, you're literally removing the opportunity for him to feel he's won something worth having. The cruel irony? The more understanding and available you are in the beginning, the less he values it, because his brain interprets that if something is offered this freely, it probably isn't that rare. Now, compare that to a different approach. When he mentions the hard day, you respond briefly and warmly, something like, "That sounds rough, hope tomorrow's better," and then you go back to living your life. You don't try to save him. You don't become his unprompted therapist. What does his brain register? That you're empathetic, but that you also have your own life, your own world, that you're not desperate to emotionally attach before anything real has been built, that if he wants your full attention, he's going to have to earn it. That shift alone changes everything. Sign 2: too much transparency too soon. We live in an era that equates authenticity with oversharing. Social media has conditioned us to believe that putting everything on display is somehow brave or real. But there's a massive difference between being genuine and handing someone your entire inner world before they've shown they deserve access to it. Picture this. You're on a first or second date, and he asks about your life. You open up completely. You mention the ex who cheated on you and how it damaged your confidence. You share that you've been anxious about work lately, that you sometimes cry in the shower, that your weekends have been lonely because your friends are all busy. This feels like vulnerability, like honesty, but neurologically, you've just made a significant strategic error. The prefrontal cortex, the part of his brain handling long-term evaluation, is processing all of this and arriving at an unconscious conclusion. This woman has no boundaries around her own intimacy. She doesn't understand that some things need to be discovered gradually. There's a well-documented psychological phenomenon called the Zeigarnik Effect that explains why mystery matters. Our brains place more value on incomplete things, on stories we don't know the ending to, on puzzles that haven't been solved yet. When you deliver your complete story up front, when you reveal all your vulnerabilities before trust has been built, you eliminate this effect entirely. He feels like he already knows everything about you, and therefore there's nothing left to pursue. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Men lose interest quickly when they feel there's nothing left to discover. Being selective about what you share and when isn't dishonesty, it's self-possession. It's the difference between a woman who knows her own depth and a woman who's anxious to be fully known before she's been chosen.
Sign 3. Over-effort without reciprocity. This one is painful because it often comes from a genuinely generous place, but over-effort, especially when it isn't matched, communicates something deeply counterproductive about how you see your own value. Let me tell you about a woman I'll call Sarah. She matched with a man on a dating app, and after a few weeks of good conversation, they planned their first date. Sarah spent the entire week preparing. She scoured his social media, found out his favorite type of craft beer, and bought an expensive bottle to give him as a gift. She researched restaurants she knew he'd like. She planned a post-dinner itinerary based on his interests. On the night itself, she arrived with the gift, spent the evening asking about his life, laughed at every joke, validated every opinion. The date felt perfect. He disappeared afterward. Sarah was completely blindsided. She'd done everything right, but that was exactly the problem. When you demonstrate a level of effort far exceeding what the other person is investing, you create an imbalance that the brain immediately registers. There's a principle in psychology called relational equity. We tend to value people in proportion to the effort required to keep them in our lives. When Sarah arrived with the expensive gift, planned the entire evening around his preferences, and made him the center of her attention, she unconsciously communicated that his value was far higher than her own, and that she was prepared to do all the relational heavy lifting alone. Here's the cruel irony. The more effort you put in for someone who hasn't demonstrated they deserve it, the less effort they put in, because their brain interprets that it isn't necessary. Why would he work to impress someone who's already visibly impressed? Why would he invest energy pursuing someone who's clearly already caught? Generosity is a beautiful quality, but it needs to be offered proportionally once someone has shown they're worth it, not deployed up front as a way to convince someone to stay. Sign 4. No clear standards or boundaries. This goes much deeper than just saying no when something bothers you. It's about the kind of treatment you allow, the behavior you normalize, and what you're willing to accept as a baseline. Here's a pattern that plays out constantly. You're seeing someone who runs hot and cold. One week he's texting daily, calling, making plans, acting genuinely interested. The next week, he vanishes. No response, no explanation, no acknowledgement that you exist. Then, after a few days or weeks, he reappears with a vague excuse about being busy or going through something difficult. And you, wanting to be understanding, wanting to give the benefit of the doubt, accept the explanation and pick up right where you left off. Maybe you mention you were a little hurt by the silence, but ultimately you don't establish any real consequence. You don't make it clear that this kind of inconsistency doesn't work for you. You don't follow through with action. What does his brain record? That your limits are negotiable, that your needs aren't actually a priority, that he can behave however he wants because, in the end, you'll always be there. Research in evolutionary psychology consistently shows that men unconsciously assess a potential partner's value based significantly on how firmly she protects her own standards. This isn't about being cruel or playing games. It's a primitive mechanism that evaluates whether someone will protect their own interests and refuse to settle for less than they deserve. When you tolerate inconsistency, when you accept being treated as an option rather than a priority,
When you absorb disrespect without consequence, you're communicating that your value is low, not to him consciously, but to the deepest, most instinctual part of his brain. Boundaries aren't walls, they're the clearest possible signal that you know what you're worth. Sign 5. Constant search for external validation. This is the most dangerous sign of all, and it's the most subtle. I'm not just talking about posting photos and waiting for likes. I'm talking about something far deeper and more destructive. I'm talking about the woman who can't be alone without feeling inadequate, who needs to always be in some kind of romantic situation to feel complete, who measures her own worth based on how desirable she is to men at any given moment. This shows up in conversation in ways that are easy to miss. She makes self-deprecating comments and waits for him to push back with a compliment. She asks if he finds her attractive, if he's enjoying spending time with her, if she's his type. She reads every small shift in his energy as a signal about her worth and adjusts her behavior accordingly, pulling back when he seems distant, ramping up effort when he seems to be losing interest, spending hours analyzing a single text message for hidden meaning. Neurologically, this is deeply damaging to perceived value. When you seek constant reassurance, you activate what I'd call a man's emotional stability detector. Men are evolutionarily drawn to partners who demonstrate internal groundedness. Women who have a secure, self-generated sense of value that doesn't fluctuate based on external feedback. Not because men are cold, but because chronic insecurity signals to the primitive brain that this person may not be a stable long-term partner. Every time you fish for validation, every time you show that your emotional state depends entirely on his response, you're communicating that you have no solid internal foundation, that you're emotionally dependent, that maintaining your sense of self will require an exhausting and endless supply of reassurance. And here's the tragic loop. The more you seek validation, the less you receive it, because people instinctively pull away from those who seem to need them too much, which increases your need, which pushes people further away, and the cycle repeats. The solution isn't to pretend you don't need connection or to suppress your emotions. The solution is to build a life so rich and meaningful, with genuine friendships, real passions, meaningful work, personal growth, that any one man's approval simply doesn't have the power to define how you feel about yourself. When you genuinely have that, you stop searching for it, and that groundedness is one of the most magnetic qualities a woman can have. What this all comes down to. None of this is about becoming cold, calculating, or emotionally unavailable. I'm not asking you to play games or pretend to be someone you're not. What I'm describing is the alignment of your external behavior with your actual internal value. You are worth real effort. You deserve to be treated as a priority. You deserve someone who shows up consistently, who earns your trust gradually, who is genuinely invested in building something real with you. But as long as your behavior communicates the opposite, as long as you keep undervaluing yourself through these 5 patterns, you'll keep attracting and tolerating treatment that doesn't reflect what you're actually worth. The transformation isn't about becoming cold, less generous, or less loving. It's about directing those extraordinary qualities toward yourself first. It's about knowing clearly what you will and won't accept. It's about having the self-respect to walk away from anything that consistently asks you to shrink. When you genuinely embody that, something shifts. You stop attracting men who are looking for someone easy, and you start drawing in men who are looking for someone real. You stop settling for scraps, and you start receiving the full investment you always deserved. Your value isn't something you need to perform or prove. You just need to stop apologizing for it.